You good? All right, so let me tell you about the first day of my job ever in advertising, all right? I walk in, my boss said to me, we need to do 5-second dealer tags for a Kodak camera. Now, I was all excited because these were going to be broadcast over Kmart stores all over America. I stayed up all night. I wrote 25 of these dealer tags. I walked in the next day, and she looked at it, and she said, oh, Linda, these are awful. Go back and do them over again. I said, okay. As I walked out the door, she said to me, you know, Linda, I think one day you're going to own your own ad agency. I said, oh, you saw a spark of brilliance in those ads. She said, no, I saw nothing. But what I did see is a very resilient woman. And that's going to do you well because there's a lot of rejection in this business. And that was great advice for me. Now, I knew a lot about being resilient and tough. I came from a very Tomey area, some place that you might use as a destination for some of your travelers, the Bronx. Any Bronxites out there? Okay. But I bragged a bit. You know, I told everybody I had waterfront property, which was great. And when I did start my own ad agency, we only had 5 women to start with. We used to say that we had enough estrogen at our place to make Arnold Schwarzenegger ovulate. And our very first piece of business was Herbal Essence shampoo. Do you remember that woman? Let's everybody do it. Yes! Yes! Yes, she does that in 70 countries around the world, except in China. In China, she doesn't go, She goes, ha, 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 ha. We had to tone it down a little bit, but that's okay. We couldn't really afford to pay people that much. So instead, we showered them with kindness. We did our best to be very, very collaborative. We ascribed to the philosophy that Harry Truman once said, you can accomplish anything in your lifetime as long as you're willing to take credit for none of it. So we shared ideas. We didn't have hierarchy. We shared ideas with the clients. We figured if people own ideas, they work that much harder, and you know that that's true, correct? Well, pretty soon, this sort of good spirit, this kind of power of nice took hold, and people started working harder than they ever did before because they liked it there. Within 2 years, we were one of the fastest growing agencies in the United States. We hired a couple of guys along the way. And we started winning a lot of things. We won Wendy's and Toys R Us. By the way, I wrote the Toys R Us song. Do you remember that one? I don't want to grow up. I'm a Toys R Us kid. And Kodak. And we also, with the baby boomers, we started getting a lot of pharmaceutical accounts. Lipitor for high cholesterol, Celebrex for joint pain, Swiffer for obsessive compulsives. We got everything. We started to try to figure out why we were so successful. I mean, we were smart, but we were not brilliant. We were talented, but not more talented than anybody else. And then we started looking at people who were far more successful, uber great people, and realized these extraordinary people were also really ordinary when they grew up. No one would have ever predicted their future success. Colin Powell, C- student in college. Steven Spielberg couldn't get into film school. The great Michael Jordan was cut from his high school varsity basketball team. And Jack Ma, the founder of Alibaba, couldn't even get a job at a KFC when he graduated college. None of these people had what you would call the it factor. They didn't have Mensa IQs. They had low SAT scores, bad GPAs. But what they did have was the grit factor. And we define grit. I'm an ad guy, so I made it an acronym. Guts, resilience, initiative, and tenacity. As a matter of fact, 2% of people who are actually born prodigies, only 2% of them actually become successful because things are just too easy for them. They don't know how to deal with challenges. But 98% of the world's most successful people have this grit factor. The problem that we face today is we know that we need to concentrate on focus, but it is so hard for so many of us. We have so many important, crucial things that need to be focused on, that need to be, and they're really important details. I mean, I'm not talking about, no, seriously, why are you laughing? This is really important stuff. You have to prioritize things, and obviously there are people Focus here. You need to think. I don't know why I can't get your attention. You get my point, right? Here's the deal. We have so much data. We're just accosted with so much data. It's shortened our attention span. No wonder we get anything done. You know, there's a new survey out. The average attention span for human beings is now 8 seconds. Oh, maybe I say that again because you were on your phone. The average attention span is 8 seconds. Now, this is a milestone. You know why? Because the average attention span of a goldfish is 9 seconds. I mean, even the goldfish were surprised when they read that study. But the good news is you can develop grit. You don't have to be born with it. You can do it when you're 8 or 88. We talk about a lot of tips in our book, but I'll just go over a few of them now. Number one, attempting to do something really big or important or life-changing is scary. It's kind of like walking a tightrope without the safety net. So we decided to actually, for our book, we interviewed somebody who walked a tightrope without a safety net. Anybody ever hear of Nick Wallenda? The Wallenda family? Well, he walked across the Grand Canyon, and we interviewed him, not when he was walking across the Grand Canyon, of course. And it was amazing. I said, Nick, you're crazy. I know your heart's in your throat, right? I said, you have a wife, you have 3 kids? You're nuts. He said, nah, this is pretty much a cakewalk. Really? He said, yeah, what you don't realize is I practiced this for 5 friggin' years in my backyard, 10 hours a day. Under every windstorm, sandstorm, nothing could happen on the Grand Canyon that day that I hadn't already done 10 or 20 times harder in my backyard. And he learned a valuable lesson doing this, and something which I'm imparting to you guys, which is about, it's not about preparation, he said. Everything in life is about over-preparation. I call it the 30-minute rule. Anything that you decide to do, spend 30 more minutes on it. It gives you 160 hours a year more on your competition. By the way, I love this. When he reaches the ground, you'll see he kissed terra firma. And I asked him, I said, what were you thinking at the time? And he said, I was thinking, oh, darn it, what am I going to do next? The other valuable lesson, he said, you know what? We should all put ourselves mentally on a high wire. Mentally fire yourself. And I tell this to clients. Imagine that last disgruntled client of yours or that customer had 10 million friends on Facebook. You'd be out of business. I don't care where you are. Think of that person and what can you do? How proactive can you be to make sure that you could make that trip, that transaction, the best possible event possible for them? And the other thing we learned is that we have to start getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, right? I know what your world is like, and you can only imagine what the advertising world is. The same thing. Things are moving at a dizzying pace. Competition. You come into a new industry every day, but feel okay with it. Because if you're standing still, you are going under. And that's what I tell my clients every day. Standing still is going under. And take the advice of Nick Wallenda's great-great-grandfather, Kurt Wallenda, who said, real life is on the high wire. Everything else is just watching. Don't go through life being a spectator. Next thing that really bugs me is we are so afraid to fail. And the greatest success stories are people who fail. I call it failing forward. Now, I love this guy. I call him a serial failure. How many people know who James Dyson is? All right. It's usually the women because they're doing most of the cleaning still. He invented the Bagus vacuum cleaner, a very British man with billions and billions of dollars. You think of him as an amazing inventor, but what you don't realize is it took him 15 years, and he had 5,126 prototypes that totally sucked. Actually, I should say that didn't suck. And he said, thank goodness for all these failures. I wanted to do something incrementally better. And I ended up with something that was revolutionary. The other thing we do is we try to tackle problems that are too big. If you start thinking about all the things that are hitting you, you're like a deer caught in headlights. George Polya, a famous mathematician, said the biggest challenge facing humanity is we try to solve problems that are too big. You have to unpack them and unwind them into small, manageable problems. Otherwise, you will never get anything done. And when you do that, you can cross any bridge. Even if that bridge is across Niagara Falls. About the turn of the century, Canada and the United States knew they had a gold mine if they could build a bridge to get sightseers to see Niagara Falls. The problem was it had to be a suspension bridge, and they had to get a steel cable across to start construction, and they didn't know how to do it. A boat couldn't do it because it was a big gorge, and they didn't have airplanes yet. This stymied them. For months and months, they were about to give up the whole project until finally one person who wasn't an engineer said, I don't know, let's try to solve a simpler problem. Let's try to get something across that we can connect. Like what? I don't know. Let's have a kite flying contest and see who gets a string across. And this little boy, Horace, who got $10, was the first one to get his kite across to Canada. They now had Canada and the United States connected by a string. They attached the string to a rope to a bigger rope, and eventually to a steel cable. And within the year, the Rainbow Bridge was built, arguably one of the best tourist destinations in the world, and one of the most profitable, all because they told someone to go fly a kite. Now, I know we go through life, and we're all starring in our own movie, of course. But as a Buddhist said, don't go through life expecting applause because there's nobody in the audience. The fact is that you can accomplish much more if you're willing to actually move the spotlight and share the stage with other people. We were so thrilled because Jay Leno, who I don't even know, who called me up out of the blue when we wrote The Power of Nice, decided to do the foreword for our book. And he said, the reason that I keep getting guests back and the reason I'm successful is because I always move the spotlight on them. It's a great metaphor for life, right? He said, I make them seem smarter, funnier, wittier than me. And that was my success. Here's a man who truly understands the power of empathy, something which you know firsthand because you're in such a people business. And by the way, part of that is knowing when to not talk. I think that we all love the sound of our own voice. But it's neurologically impossible, absolutely impossible, to absorb or learn anything when you're talking. So sometimes we need to shut up and listen more and get a wealth of information. I know it helped me to get a very wealthy client. We were pitching a big corporate account, and the CEO was really unhappy with all the agencies he met with. He had a dozen presentations, and he thought they were terrible. He walked in, and Robin Covell and I, who had founded the agency with, we saw right away what this guy really wanted to do was talk about himself. So we kicked away the presentation, and I'm not kidding. This man spoke. He was quite a braggart. He spoke for 2 hours straight about himself, about his life, about the things he had done for the company, the things he was going to do for the company. As the 2 hours were up, we shook his hand. We figured that was the end of it. The next day, we found out we won a multi-million-dollar piece of business. I said, really? Why? He said, because the CEO, and I'm quoting here, believed that you really understood the details and depth of where he wanted to take the company. He said, these ladies really get me. Oh, we got him all right. We got him all right. And the other thing that we got is learning, and we did this through a lot of research, is that one of the most powerful forms of communication is actually not the big presentations or the big la-di-das, it's making small talk. Take a while to just look at this one. It's very cute, right? Small talk, which we're losing a lot of because people are so buried in all their digital data, is the way that we make connections between people. And the best kind of small talk is between people that you don't know, because every time you make that connection, you're opening a door, and it could change the course of your career. It actually could even save your life. Sandra works in a Starbucks in Tacoma, Washington. And all her customers would come in, and they wouldn't even bother giving her the time of day, except for one woman, Anne Marie. Anne Marie would stop, and she would make small talk with Sandra. Ask her how her day was, how she was feeling. One day, Anne Marie walked in, and Sandra looked at her and said, "What's wrong? You look very sad." And Anne-Marie started to cry, and she said, I have kidney failure, and I just found out this week that nobody in my family is a blood match. Sandra leaned over to her, and she put her hand over her hand and said, you know what? I'm going to get tested for you. As luck would have it, she was a perfect blood match. She donated her kidney, and now the two of them are the best of friends. And now they not only share friendships about their family, but also their grandchildren. Now, you're going to meet a lot of people over the next few days. And although they may not, readily offer you, one of their internal organs, they may give you a wealth of information, and maybe you want to take them out for a Starbucks afterwards. People think grit is also about my way or the highway. It gets a bad rap. Sturdy like an oak tree, unbending. Actually, the strongest plant in the forest is the bamboo, because the bamboo has a hollow base, and it can bend and adapt into any weather situation. And that's why it's so durable. And I believe that's a great metaphor for the world that you're in, that we're all in now. You have to bend and adapt, bend and adapt. But instead of looking at the glass half empty, I look at it half full and say, well, when you're bending in a different direction, you'll see a sky full of opportunities you maybe never saw before. And the other thing about grit, like a good Twinkie, grit has no expiration date. And you can have it at 8 or 80. Pablo Casals, one of the great cellists of all time, was still practicing 3 hours a day when he was in the 90s. And someone said to him, why are you doing this? You're 94 years old. And he looked up amused and he said, because I'm beginning to see some improvement. And let's retire the word retirement, okay? The word retirement was invented during the industrial age simply to get older people out of the workforce because they didn't have enough jobs for younger people. The fact is, sitting on a beach and doing nothing doesn't make anybody happy. Am I right? Okay? The definition of happiness, if you spoke to neuroscientists, the definition of happiness, what? Some people are happy doing that. I gotcha. It's not the absence of problems, it's the way you feel when you solve problems. There's a wonderful man named Marvin. They talk about we shouldn't retire, we should rewire. He was an electrical engineer, so he did a lot of rewiring. And when he got into his 90s, he realized that he really wanted to just help people in his community. He was in a assisted living. So he said to these folks, what can I do to make your life better? They said, well, Marvin, we don't laugh anymore. We want to laugh some more. He knew they weren't connected to the internet, and he was basically fixing his own hard drive. So he said, I'm going to do these laughter workshops. So they had Laugh with Marvin once a week, and he would show them clips from Saturday Night Live and Carol Burnett, and they laughed themselves silly out of their wheelchairs. A lot of people said they called Marvin, they called him amazing. I called him Dad. And I think one of the best ways that we can use our grit is when we do it for good causes. It's not just charity, it's the work that you do. You do more than provide a service. You play a valuable role in somebody's life. You enhance their life. Matthew talks about boundaries divide us, but travel unites us. You're creating all these world ambassadors. And you're uniting people in ways that you can't even imagine sometimes. Todd Schoendorfer was told by an advisor many years ago that he should take a trip to Morocco. And on the trip, he happened to notice a crippled woman who was crawling across the road by her hands because she couldn't afford a wheelchair. And he realized that there are millions of people in third world countries who have to crawl in order to get from place to place. He was so upset by this, he went back to his home in California. He was an engineer by trade, and used his guts, resilience, initiative, tenacity to create a durable and inexpensive wheelchair. And he finally built one out of bicycle tires and lawn chairs, one that cost $48. Now, several years later, the Free Wheelchair Mission, and that's Don on the right there, has donated 500,000 wheelchairs to immobile people around the world, with hopes to do it for 20 million more. Never think for 1 second that what you do does not have the effect of empowering somebody, improving their lives, and possibly even improving the lives of everybody that they meet and touch and get to know. You are in the business of creating powerful journeys for people. But your journey, in many ways, has just begun. And how you use your grit and perseverance and determination determines where you will want to go, but the places are almost limitless. But if you want a little inspiration, just take a look at what these folks have done.